Everyone thought the drama around Doug and Joni Lamb had finally cooled down, until Lisa Weiss stepped in and dropped a revelation so explosive that the entire fanbase went into meltdown. Within minutes, comments flooded every platform, theories spiraled out of control, and people begged for answers. What Lisa revealed didn't just shake the story, it blew the doors wide open. And now everyone is asking the same question: how deep does this really go? To the outside world, Doug and Lisa Weiss looked like the picture of a perfect, godly marriage. They stood together on church stages, hand in hand, speaking to crowds about love, faith, and the power of commitment. Smiling in every photo, finishing each other's sentences, praying together on camera. People saw them and thought, that's what I want. Their relationship was seen as something sacred, an example of what Christian love was supposed to look like. But what no one saw was what happened after the lights went off. Behind the scenes, things were different. Lisa wasn't living the dream people thought she was. She was tired, not from a lack of sleep, but from feeling unseen. Doug, the man who spoke so beautifully about emotional intimacy, rarely looked her in the eyes when they were alone. His world was filled with sermons, conferences, travel, and praise from strangers. At home, Lisa sat in silence. Dinner would get cold on the table while she waited for him to come home. And when he did, his mind was still in the spotlight. Not with her. It wasn't one big fight or betrayal that shattered the illusion. It was the slow, quiet fading of connection. Lisa prayed harder.
And I said, no, Joni, something very bad has happened. And there's been an essay and all of this. Oh, no. And then she defended Pete. He's hurt Pete so much. The Pete that Rebecca and JW wrote a huge letter about. That Pete. The Pete that Rebecca and JW won't let into their home. That Pete is a good guy. She said that Susie was a pathological liar and that she had made these accusations against a very nice man, the chiropractor, who is deceased now, but has a record and attacked her. So I was in shock what Joni was saying to me. I implored her. I said, please reconcile with Jonathan for yourself. That would be the hope. I saw that side of her. I can only say it's nothing like the Joni on television. It's nothing like that sweet person. But I did see that person somewhat in the video where she was talking about Jonathan has been conducting a smear campaign. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I hadn't seen Jonathan conducting a smear campaign.
Hoping things would change, she smiled in public, clapped during his sermons, and played the part of the supportive wife. But inside, she was shrinking. She began to wonder if anyone noticed she was slowly disappearing. The love they once had felt more like a memory than something real. There were no screaming matches, just empty hallways. No slammed doors, just soft tears after another night of being ignored. Doug was adored by the world, but Lisa felt like a ghost in her own home. And yet, she stayed. Because that's what good wives do, right? She believed that marriage was worth fighting for. But how do you fight for something when you're the only one still holding the sword? Eventually, Lisa came to a quiet, painful truth. The marriage everyone admired never really existed, not in the way they thought. What people saw was a performance. What she lived was loneliness. And no matter how perfectly they posed for the crowd, the foundation underneath had been cracked for years. For years, Lisa Weiss had lived in the quiet shadows of ministry life. The world knew her as the elegant, faithful wife beside Dr. Doug Weiss, the marriage counselor with the confident voice and the perfect words. On stage, they looked like the picture of spiritual harmony, a couple in sync, guiding others toward healing and hope. Lisa smiled. She nodded. She supported. Always. But behind the scenes, things were different. Lisa had grown used to the silence. It started small, like a missing spark in a conversation or a distracted glance during dinner. Doug always had another phone call, another trip, another sermon to prepare. Lisa became a supporting character in a life she had helped build. She handled the little things, kept the home running, made sure things looked perfect to everyone else. That was her role. For a long time, she believed it was her calling. But deep down, something inside her was breaking. It wasn't just sadness. It was something heavier. A deep ache that came from being unseen, unheard, and slowly forgotten in the very marriage that people admired. Lisa would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when she stopped mattering. She didn't even know how it had happened. There was no dramatic betrayal, no yelling matches, just a growing distance that swallowed their connection whole. Doug was kind in public, charming even. He quoted scripture, spoke passionately about love, and always had the right words to say about commitment and intimacy. But at home, those words disappeared. Lisa's questions went unanswered. Her concerns were brushed aside. Her presence, once cherished, became routine. She started to feel like furniture, necessary but unnoticed. She prayed. Oh, how she prayed. Not the shallow, rehearsed prayers people post on social media, but the desperate kind, whispered through tears, begging God to help her hold it together. "Please, Lord, bring us back," she would say again and again. She believed in redemption. She believed in miracles. But as the years went on, hope began to feel like a lie she told herself to survive. The breaking point didn't come with yelling or slamming doors. It came one quiet night when Lisa stood outside Doug's office door. He was preparing a sermon on emotional intimacy. She listened as he practiced, his voice smooth and passionate, talking about the importance of connecting with your spouse and listening to their heart. Lisa stood there frozen, tears stinging her eyes. He was preaching a truth he hadn't lived in years. He spoke of intimacy like it was alive in their home, but Lisa hadn't felt close to him in forever. She realized in that moment that her marriage had become a message, a brand. And she wasn't part of it. She was just the proof he used to show the crowd that his methods worked. She walked back to their room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. No shouting, no anger, just grief. A deep, quiet grief that comes when you finally understand that something sacred has died. She cried into her hands, not just for what had been lost, but for how long she had stayed silent, how much of herself she had buried to protect an image. That night, Lisa made a decision. Not the kind you post about or announce with fireworks. It was a quiet decision, a personal one. She decided to stop praying for the marriage to be saved and start praying for strength to face what was real. She started writing. At first, it was just messy thoughts on paper. She wrote letters to herself, to God, to Doug. She wrote about the years she spent pretending, about the loneliness she felt even while sleeping next to someone. She wrote to remember herself. Slowly, through that journaling, she began to find a voice she hadn't heard in years, her own. It took time, but Lisa began to reclaim little pieces of herself. She started asking questions out loud. She spoke gently but firmly. "I don't feel seen. This isn't working." Doug would listen distractedly or sometimes dismissively, but she wasn't speaking for him anymore. She was speaking for her. The real turning point came when Lisa shared her truth publicly. It wasn't a rage-filled expose. It was calm, honest. She didn't aim to destroy Doug or the ministry. They had built it together, but she couldn't carry the lie any longer. In 2024, Lisa finally sat down and told the truth. She talked about the silence, the loneliness, the years of being invisible beside a man adored by millions. "I believed in him," she said quietly, "but I lost myself trying to keep that belief alive." Her words weren't meant to hurt. They were meant to heal. But the reaction was swift. Some praised her bravery. Others accused her of bitterness. But Lisa stood firm, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't trying to win approval. She wasn't performing. She wasn't playing the role of the perfect wife. She was just being honest. And in that honesty, she found freedom. Lisa's voice, once buried under the weight of expectation and image, became something powerful. Not loud, not angry, just real. Her story resonated with women across the country, wives who had smiled through pain, who had prayed through betrayal, who had stayed silent to protect a dream that was already gone. Lisa gave them permission to speak, to say, "I'm not okay," and to believe that didn't make them weak. Doug's world continued. He remarried quickly. Photos of his new relationship spread across Christian media, full of blessings and praise. Lisa saw it all. She felt the sting, but she didn't fall apart. Not this time. Because this time, she knew who she was. The breaking point wasn't the end of Lisa's story. It was the beginning. It was the moment she stopped protecting an image and started protecting her soul. The woman who once lived in silence now stood in truth. And the voice that finally rose from the quiet, it didn't just heal her, it helped others find their voice too. And that was the real miracle. Lisa never thought her life would fall apart in silence. There were no screaming fights, no slammed doors, no big dramatic exits. Just quiet, long, heavy silence that stretched through the halls of her home. through dinners that grew cold on the table, through nights spent alone in bed while her husband poured himself into another sermon, another interview, another public appearance. She had been the faithful wife for over 30 years, smiling beside her husband Doug on church stages, hosting guests, raising their children, supporting the ministry. To the world, she was the picture of grace and strength. But behind closed doors, Lisa felt like she was disappearing. It didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly, through unanswered questions, missed conversations, and nights when she cried into her pillow, trying not to make a sound. At first, she told herself it was just a season, that maybe Doug was stressed, that the ministry needed more of his time. She prayed harder. She gave more. She stayed silent because she believed love meant sacrifice, and if she just held on long enough, things would go back to the way they used to be. But the silence didn't lift. In fact, it got louder. She would sit at the dinner table and watch the clock tick. He'd walk in late, distracted, already thinking about the next event. He'd kiss her on the cheek like it was a habit, not a gesture of love. And Lisa would smile, because that's what was expected. Because if she showed the cracks, if she told the truth, it might all come crashing down. The turning point didn't come with a fight. It came one night when she stood in the doorway of his office and listened to him speak out loud about emotional intimacy for a sermon he was preparing. He sounded so passionate, so sure of himself. He spoke about listening, connecting, loving well, but he never looked up. He didn't see her. And in that moment, something in Lisa broke. She realized she was married to someone who could speak about love to thousands, but couldn't show it to the one person who had stood by him through it all. It wasn't anger that hit her. It was grief. The kind of deep, quiet grief that comes when you realize you've been holding your breath for years, hoping someone would notice you were drowning. That night, she didn't pray for Doug to change. She prayed for strength to face the truth. From there, something began to shift. Lisa stopped trying to fix it. She stopped explaining away the distance, stopped blaming herself for not being enough. And slowly, she began to rediscover pieces of herself that had been buried under years of pretending. She started small. She pulled out an old journal, the one she hadn't touched in years, and wrote down her thoughts. They came out messy and raw, filled with sadness, confusion, and questions she didn't yet have answers to. But it was hers, her space, her truth. She began taking walks in the early morning. At first, it was just to get out of the house, to escape the weight of everything. But as she walked, she started to notice things she hadn't seen in a long time. The sound of birds, the way the sun came through the trees, the feel of the wind against her face. It was like waking up from a long, exhausting sleep. For so long, she had been the wife of Dr. Doug Weiss. That was her identity, her role. But now, walking alone in the quiet, she began to ask herself a different question. Who am I without him? The answer didn't come all at once. It unfolded slowly, day by day. In conversations with old friends who remembered her before the titles and the cameras, in church gatherings where people spoke honestly, without pretense, in the laughter she didn't know she still had inside her. Lisa didn't speak out publicly right away. When she finally did, it wasn't to attack anyone or to stir up drama. She spoke softly, but with truth. She talked about the years she felt invisible, about loving someone so much that she lost sight of herself. Her voice shook at first, but then it steadied, and as she spoke, she saw other women nodding, some crying, because they understood, because they had lived it too. Lisa wasn't just telling her story, she was reclaiming it. She stopped scrolling through social media, stopped reading the comments under Doug's new life. She turned inward, learning to be okay in her own skin again. Some days were still hard. Some nights, the memories crept in and brought tears, but she no longer let them control her. She stopped asking for permission to feel. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. And most importantly, she stopped waiting for someone else to see her. She began to see herself. Lisa found peace, not in the applause, not in public validation, but in quiet moments where she could simply breathe, where she could sit with herself and not feel like something was missing. She didn't need to be part of someone else's story anymore. She was writing her own, and that, she realized, was the beginning of everything. After everything fell apart, Lisa Weiss found herself waking up in a house that suddenly felt too quiet. For years, her life had been filled with movement, Doug's booming voice echoing from one room to the next, ministry phone calls, travel plans, meetings, the hum of constant busyness. Now, there was just stillness. And in the beginning, that stillness felt unbearable. She would get out of bed in the morning and just sit at the edge for a while, unsure what came next. Her phone was quieter too. The people who used to check in, ask her to attend church events, or book her for ministry gatherings had stopped calling. It was like her identity had been tied to being Dr. Doug Weiss's wife, and now that she no longer was, they didn't know what to do with her. Or maybe they just chose to forget. At first, the pain was raw, not just because of the betrayal or the public fallout, but because everything she had helped build now seemed to exist without her. Her face disappeared from websites. Her name was removed from church flyers. It was like someone had taken a giant eraser to her life, and now she was left staring at a blank page. But even in that loneliness, Lisa began to notice something she hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Not the kind that comes with excitement or joy right away. This freedom felt awkward at first, like wearing someone else's shoes. It was unfamiliar. She didn't know what to do with all the space she suddenly had. Space in her day, space in her mind, space in her heart. For so long, she had filled that space with someone else's needs, someone else's schedule, someone else's dreams. Now, for the first time, it was hers. Lisa started with small steps. She lit candles in the evening and let soft music play in the background. She sat in her living room without turning on the TV, just letting the silence wrap around her, not like a punishment anymore, but like peace. She started reading books again, not for a Bible study or to prepare for a church event, but simply because she wanted to. She would curl up with a blanket and lose herself in a story, and sometimes she'd find herself smiling without even realizing it. There were hard days too, days when a memory would sneak up on her and knock the wind out of her. Like seeing an old photo of Doug holding their child during a family trip, or remembering the way he used to pray before dinner when things were still good. There were moments when she felt like calling him, not to get back together, but to say, "Do you even realize what you threw away?" But she never made those calls. She wrote it down instead, pouring the ache into her journal where it could live without judgment. Her journaling became her lifeline. The pages didn't just hold pain, they started to hold healing. Slowly, Lisa's words shifted. They weren't just about loss anymore. They were about discovery. Who am I without him? What do I love? What makes me feel alive? These were questions she had never taken time to ask herself, and now they were leading her into something new. She began to reach out to old friends, not the ones from ministry circles, but the ones who knew her before all of that, before she was someone's wife, before the stage lights and the church applause. They talked about books, about their kids, about life's little joys. Some of them had walked through heartbreak too, and those conversations felt like breathing fresh air. She didn't have to pretend with them. She could laugh, cry, or sit in silence. And it was all okay. Lisa also started showing up again. Not for anyone else, but for herself. She went to small churches, ones where she could sit in the back and just listen. No one asked her to smile for a camera. No one expected her to stand beside a husband or represent a marriage. She wasn't part of a brand anymore. She was just a woman sitting in a pew, asking God to meet her where she was. And slowly, God did. Not with fireworks, not with grand gestures, but in small ways. In the way the sun warmed her skin during a morning walk, in the laughter of children at a park, in the sound of a friend saying, "You're not alone," in a journal entry where she realized she hadn't cried that day, not because she was numb, but because she was actually okay. Lisa began helping others in quiet ways. She volunteered at a women's shelter. She mentored young women who had been through toxic relationships, not as a counselor, but as someone who had lived it. She didn't give sermons or write bestsellers. She just listened. She shared pieces of her story, how she stayed too long, how she lost herself, and how she started over. And every time someone looked at her and said, "Me too," something in her heart healed a little more. She wasn't trying to be inspirational. She was just being real. Her home became a space of warmth and comfort. Not perfect, but peaceful. There were books stacked on tables, photos of her children on the walls, candles flickering in the evening. She'd play soft worship music or old jazz records, depending on her mood. She'd cook dinner for herself and sit down at the table, no longer waiting for someone else to show up. She had stopped waiting. And in that stillness, Lisa found something she never expected. She liked who she was becoming. She was no longer the quiet, supportive wife who stood in the shadows. She wasn't trying to earn love by being small. She was growing into a woman who knew her worth, not because of her marriage, her church status, or her last name, but because she had walked through fire and come out whole. There was a moment, months later, that marked it something big for her, though no one else saw it but her. She was sitting on a park bench, drinking coffee, watching people walk by, and she realized something. She hadn't thought about Doug all day, not in a bitter way. He just wasn't taking up space in her mind anymore. That was the moment she understood what freedom really felt like. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about no longer being controlled by it. It was about waking up and living a life that felt honest, peaceful, and hers. She had nothing to prove anymore, nothing to protect. She wasn't defending an image. She was living a truth. Lisa knew that not everyone would understand. People still whispered. Some still idolized Doug and ignored what had happened. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. She didn't need their permission to move on. She had given herself permission, and that was enough. She kept journaling. She kept walking. She kept saying yes to small joys, coffee dates, new books, quiet retreats, spontaneous laughter. She no longer felt erased. She was writing her own story now, a story not about being a victim, but about being reborn. Her healing didn't come in one grand moment. It came in thousands of small ones. It came in silence that turned into peace, in grief that softened into gratitude, in a woman who, once invisible, had learned to stand tall in her own light. Lisa Weiss was no longer just surviving. She was living, fully, freely, and finally, as herself.